The wealthiest place on the planet is the graveyard. Because in the graveyard, we will find inventions that we never, ever were exposed to. Ideas, dreams that never became reality. Hopes and aspirations that were never acted upon.
Question is, what are you going to do with your time? What drives you? And greatness is a lot of small things done well. Day after day, workout after workout.
Greetings to you wherever I find you in the world. This is of course Hassan Khan coming back to you once again with another special interview. A few disclaimers before I do though. Apologies for the delay in this. I've sadly found myself in and out of hospitals and face health issues. But the good news is that I've been able to do an interview and done some quick editing. The other disclaimer is, please do forgive us, but some of the audio may lag at places, but please blame Zoom and not us. I always want to thank the Metro boys and girls for everything they've done over the last 3 months in supporting people during this lockdown period. These have been incredibly difficult times, and I know that a few of our loyal listeners to this podcast have unfortunately lost loved ones or friends or colleagues, and without naming names, I just want to let you know that I stand by you and Metro Blind Sport, and I'm sure Martin won't mind me saying so. We stand by you during these difficult times, and I'm hoping that some of these interviews have given you something to smile at, if not to think, what the hell is he on about? But in all seriousness, I just want to say that these have been dark times. My deepest condolences to absolutely everybody, and I hope the following interview puts a smile on your face. Now, every interview that I've done over the last 3 or 4 months, I've had the very same disclaimer. You know, these are inspirational people, phenomenal people, and they're fantastic. Today, our focus is a little bit different, because today we're not just focusing on the field of play, but rather on the field of life and on the field of business. The two guests that I'm bringing to you today are not only outstanding sportsmen, but actually are incredibly successful human beings in the blind world. And we always talk about having, heroes and people to follow and emulate in the blind world. Well, believe you me, you wouldn't go wrong in following any of these gentlemen that I've got coming up for you. Between them, they are, in their own right, businessmen, trailblazers, analysts, Paralympian, CBE. I know you've heard that one before, but these gentlemen coming up for you are truly amazing, and I enjoyed every second of their chat, and I just sat here listening and taking it all in, and at times envious. And yeah, you do want to hear out for when one of them bumps into Bill Gates. Look, it's been a while. I'm going to bring in my guest speakers, and we're going to go straight into it. So I've got Mr. Chris Lewis, who plays blind cricket. He's a keen tandemist, amongst other sports. And then we've got Chris Mairs, who not only did he graduate from Cambridge, is a CBE, a Paralympian, but also a very successful businessman, as you'll learn throughout this interview. Hello, gentlemen. And Chris, let's start with you. Oh dear, I did that again, didn't I? Now, the thing is, there's two Chris's here. I've been informed I can call them old Chris or younger Chris, good-looking Chris. Mr. Mairs, let's start with you. Take me back to your early life and tell me really your sight loss journey, your school, your university, and up to now.
Okay, so let's start from the beginning. So I was born with a very rare hereditary version of retinitis pigmentosa, and it was diagnosed when I was only 18 months old. All my siblings had the same condition, although my parents had perfect vision. I went to a normal school, which was, I think in hindsight, a good thing, although it had some challenges at the time. Not being able to see the blackboard, for example, didn't strike me as being particularly difficult at the time, but in hindsight, it probably was a bit of a barrier. Then I went to Cambridge, studied maths and then computer science in the third year. And when I studied computer science, it was only a 1-year course because there wasn't enough material for 3 years, which dates me slightly. I think this was in 1979 when I graduated. We were still doing stuff on punched cards in those days. And then worked for IBM for a short while, then co-founded a business called Metaswitch Networks in 1981, which coincidentally, about 3 weeks ago, Microsoft announced a definitive agreement to acquire Metaswitch Networks after a mere 39 years of growing the business. So fortunately, I wasn't involved for the whole 39 years. I was chief technical officer there for a long time. And I now spend most of my time doing early stage investing and mentoring of technology startups. I'm on the board of about 8 different startup businesses. I'm on the board of the Raspberry Pi Foundation, which is an education charity focused on improving young people's digital skills.
That's an extraordinary early life to cover in such a short time. Thank you for that. Chris, now I believe you are our second guest who has a CBE. So please do tell me, how did that come about for you then?
Oh, CBE. Yeah, CBE.
How did that come about?
Good question. It came about because, I think indirectly, because I became a fellow of the Royal Academy of Engineering. And then the CBE was a total surprise for me. But as it was designated for services to engineering, I'm assuming that somebody at the Royal Academy felt it was appropriate to nominate me. And I did say to the chief executive, I said, well, I'm not sure who wrote the nomination, but tell them it was a brilliant piece of creative writing. And he said, Chris, in the immortal phrase, I can neither confirm nor deny, but I'm very pleased to see that you got
it. Brilliant. And so when going through university, school, and then your working life, were you totally blind or are you partially sighted?
I was registered blind when I was 18, although, as everyone listening to this will probably know, being registered blind is a huge way away from being completely without sight. At the time, my sight was just on the edge. It was decreasing slowly, so I was down at about 1.5% vision when I was registered blind. I am now, to all intents and purposes, completely blind. Cannot see someone even when they're standing like 6 inches in front of me. Can't see my own hand. So that's been a process that's taken 60 years, basically.
Fabulous. Well, we'll come on to some of the barriers that you faced and the hurdles that you jumped. Let's go on. I've been told that maybe I can refer to you as younger and the older Chris. And I don't know which one, so I'm going to guess. Mr. Lewis, let's come over to you. Are you the younger Chris?
I believe so, let's say by a few years, but not by many, actually. So my story is a little bit different in that I was diagnosed with Stargardt's macular degeneration when I was 6 and was at a regular primary school in Derby. And then my parents decided, through advice, to send myself and my younger brother away to St Vincent's Blind School in Liverpool, which is a Catholic blind boarding school. And so I was there, but I also luckily the headmistress intervened and sent me out to a grammar school each day in the second year. So I actually got a good Scally Scouse education for certainly up to O level. And my sight at that time, similar to Chris, I couldn't see the blackboard, but I could still read books. I was reading text up until I was probably 15. And then went back to Derby to do A-levels and then on to university in Manchester. And during those times, there's not a lot of technology around, some CCTV stuff for reading. And then gradually, as I then got into work, started using text-to-speech on laptops and on different devices. And I actually started working in the telecom industry and have been working as a research analyst looking at how technology changes, which is in some ways a great job to do because part of that change has been accessibility of certainly of mobile devices. And that career lasted, still going on now. I run my own business now, 36 years in, and still looking at how technology changes, traveling around the world, and generally enjoying myself.
What about your other project? You've got 1 or 2 other projects going on as well, have you not?
The business I run here works with, actually, funny enough, companies like the one that Chris founded, Metaswitch, and other vendors like Ericsson and Cisco and Nokia that people will be familiar with. Also working with many of the providers, so Vodafone, BT, all those sort of companies. I set up a conference when I set this business up called the Great Telco Debate, which I run every year. And part of that is me literally being on stage the whole day, getting debates going, managing that. And I've also been involved in looking at research as to how technology can help disabled people of all sorts, obviously visually impaired in particular, but how technology works with people, whether you're deaf, so you can have signing services, or people who can't physically touch using voice and so on. So just leveraging all of the communications technology that I'm very familiar with to help people with different sorts of disabilities.
Look, I've always said this on these interviews, that we've got quite a lot of trailblazers in the blind world. I think we need to give you a platform and let you tell the story even more so. And so you're both inspiring to me. What were your barriers, both of you? What were your barriers and hurdles that you have to jump over throughout university and to achieve what you have so far?
I'll tell you what mine was. My biggest barrier, I think, was my own stubbornness and unwillingness to be categorized as a blind person. So, I mean, I think my stubbornness helped me, but it also hindered me. And I'll tell you a couple of stories about how it hindered me. One of them was during the interview process for university. I didn't carry a white stick at this point. I could see enough to actually not bump into people, and I could navigate my way around. And it was a buffet lunch, which is always a difficult thing for blind people. But I thought, well, okay, I'll grab a bit of this meat off here and a bit of this bread and these peanuts from over here. So I've got bread, peanuts and meat. Well, it's not a balanced diet, but it'll keep me going. So I got this food and I went and started chatting to one of the lecturers, and then got him interested in his research topic. So he's off on a bit of a trail talking about his research, which gave me the opportunity to grab a mouthful of food. So I picked up the peanuts and put the peanuts into my mouth, only to discover that they weren't actually peanuts. What I'd actually done was pick up the contents of an ashtray. So I'd stuffed my mouth with cigarette butts. So, here's an etiquette question. When you find yourself eating butt ends, what do? Do you swallow or do you spit?
I tell you what, Chris, you don't go to that university, because he should have told you got butt ends on your plate.
Well, indeed. I mean, it was bizarre, because not only did he not tell me that, but he also did not batten. Well, as far as I can tell, he certainly didn't pause when I started eating these and when I swallowed them, and he carried on talking to me. Did offer me a place, actually, which I can't decide whether that means he's completely autistic himself, or if he thought, this guy must be hard if he eats cigarette butts, I'm not going to turn him down.
But what were your barriers in the employment world then? So like working in the 80s and comparing it to now, have those barriers, is it a lot easier now because thanks to technology?
I think it is easier now because there's a whole lecture which I've given in the past on the random walk between technology and disability, where it does go 2 steps forward and then 1 step back, or sometimes 3 steps back. But overall, I think that it has become easier. There are some things that became more difficult, like for a long period of time when we had graphical user interfaces in the early days of Windows. They were a nightmare for speech synthesis. And the web, when it came along and became very dynamic, again, a nightmare for accessibility. But there are some technologies like speech synthesis has gotten much, much, much better. The power of devices in your hand has got much better. So it is easier now, I think. But in the old days, fortunately, I worked for a company that was quite enlightened at IBM, and then at the startup where I ended up. And I had an assistant who basically read to me. So she would read the technical manuals to me, and I would dictate markups on people's code. I would actually use a closed circuit television. In those days, I could still read code using a closed circuit television. So just about managed to scrape through.
Fabulous. So how about you, Chris, Mr. Lewis?
I hadn't realised how parallel our stories were, actually, but they are. When I was at the grammar school in Liverpool, basically got a former teacher in, and she every evening helped me with prep. She'd read stuff to me. And I think as a student going through, I used the student tape library to record articles, and then when I got to work, I'd same again to record things about the industry. I could still see some. I was struggling to see the computer screen in my 20s. So then technology did start to kick in, and then I think to Chris's point, probably the arrival of the smartphone and the iPad has been the biggest change, because the ability to consume content on any number of platforms, and the fact that you can get your daily newspapers through the RNIB Talking Newspaper Service, as well as so much other content. And because everything's now on the web, every article that gets published, every video, it's just a click away for you to consume. University, I guess I just paid attention. I think it's that thing about listening and not being worried about actually being able to see things. People say a lot more than they tend to put on slides in presentations. So actually, my career as an analyst, I think I pick up a lot more by listening than people do by looking at people's slides.
Did you face any prejudice when you were going for your job interviews? and climbing up the career ladder? Was there any negativity because of your disabilities?
Not for me. IBM already, this was in the late 70s, already had a very strong diversity policy. 30 years ahead of their time, really, in many ways. So they just bent over backwards to make sure they could accommodate me. And when I joined the business that we co-founded, I already knew the founders, so that was easy. They knew what they were taking on.
I think getting in, the start was difficult. When I left university, I applied for hundreds of jobs. And initially, I didn't put blind on the form, but I got interviews and then rejected. And then I put blind on the form and got rejected. And actually, I got my first break was through a girl who'd done the same course at university, who called me and said they needed people who spoke French and German to go in and do interviews. I think that first job is the real barrier. And then after that, going for my second job, I remember it was a company called Logica that Chris will know. And I remember going for my fifth interview there. And I said, no one's asked me about my vision problem. And they said, well, you've been doing your job for the last 5 years at the first company. You can obviously do it. So it's not a question. I think once you're in there and you've got a reputation, you've done a job well, that's fine. But getting that first break, I think, is the real challenge.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think the other thing is that if you are able to do the job, then and demonstrate that you can do the job and deliver value, then it becomes much easier for the employer to make accommodations which otherwise might be regarded as not cost effective. So if they reckon this person is really valuable, we need to keep them. Surprising how willing they will be to throw money at the problem.
Okay, so on this podcast, a lot of people have come on and talked about how sports has made a massive difference to their lives, to their personal lives and their work lives. Tell me a bit about how sports was introduced to you, what difference it's made to you, and your achievements so far. Let's go to you, Mr. Lewis.
I was very lucky in that my dad was a semi-pro footballer, plays football at a very high level, and we were always kicking the ball around and playing football. I think I was even the captain of the cricket team at the junior school. And then when I went to St Vincent's, we played blind cricket, we played football in the yard every lunchtime. So I just carried on. I then went to the grammar school and they made me play rugby with the other kids. And I vividly remember the first day when he said, Lewis, tackle the boy around the ankle. I said, I can't see his ankles, sir. And he said, well, hit the big bit in the middle then. So I did. And I was quite quick. I was always I sprinted for the school as well. I love sport. And in many ways, I moved away from blind sport, even though we'd done it at St Vincent's. And then when I moved down to London in the early 80s, I actually managed a football team, a Sunday league football team with fully sighted people, because I still had enough peripheral vision. I got in trouble a few times for not being able to see very well. And then I just carried on and really enjoyed and played actually until my late 40s, football. And then when my sight got really bad, actually, believe it or not, Hassan, I heard you on the radio with Rory on In Touch. And I then got in touch and said, right, I can't play football anymore. Perhaps I should try blind cricket again. And since then, I've just carried on doing that. I ride a tandem now, which I absolutely love. I go cross-country skiing with Mike Brace and a few of the people you've already had on the podcast, and play golf. And I think sport is an unbelievably important part of my life. It keeps me sane. And of course, we like the competitive side to it. I couldn't believe when I came back to cricket and the like, how competitive vision impaired sport was actually. So no, always loved sport. It's been a big part of my life.
We had to do sport at school, but I never played in any school teams or anything. But when I went to Cambridge, there was a lot of opportunity to row. And I, in fact, rowed 6 days a week for all 3 years I was at Cambridge, and then ended up rowing in the college first boat. And it's a sport where actually not being able to see is not a huge problem, because a lot of the rhythm and cadence of the boat all comes through the feeling through your feet and through the slide. So that actually was a great way for me to participate on pretty equal terms with everybody else. In my 20s, I suppose, I was also listening to In Touch, and I'd just been away on a water skiing holiday for the first time in my life in Cyprus, and got quite addicted to water skiing, but had figured that I would never be able to compete at water skiing because I couldn't see the slalom boys, I couldn't see the jump and so on. And then I was listening to In Touch, and there was an article about parachuting. This guy called Gerald Price being interviewed, who was bemoaning the fact he hadn't been allowed to parachute. But he was saying, but in contrast, he said, I absolutely love water skiing. I'm on the committee of the British Disabled Water Ski Association. I thought, is that really a thing? And anyway, phoned them up, went down, skied a couple of times, got invited to join the team, went off to Norway 3 months later for a competition, and then spent the next 15 years travelling around the world skiing in top-level disabled water skiing tournaments. I was captain of the disabled water ski team, yeah. So it was a surprisingly well-evolved, for such a niche sport, it was quite well-evolved, and it was quite integrated into the governing body for the able-bodied sport as well. So there was a disabled world championships, the disabled European championships, and various other international competitions which we competed in, and we actually won the worlds. I mean, we won the world championships 5 times when I was in the team, I think, and when I was captaining it, which was a great experience.
What about your Paralympics? Because I understand that you're also a Paralympian.
I wouldn't say that. Yeah, I have competed in the Winter Paralympics 1988. I would say that was not really spectacular success. I took up downhill skiing in 86, 87, largely because one of the guys I water skied with was a guy called Mike Hammond, who captained, a one-legged guy called Mike Hammond, who captained the British disabled downhill team for many years. And he persuaded me to give it a go. And I got interested enough to get to the stage where I could compete in the 88 Paralympics, and I competed in a couple of world championships. I think 91 was the last one I competed in. But I then retired gracefully before killing myself because it's pretty scary.
And I think Chris was being rather, Mr. Lewis, that is, he was being rather modest when he talked about his sporting prowesses. So, cricketing, from a cricketing point of view, when I met you, Chris, I think you're one of the hardest hitting batsmen for your sight category. And just, there's no secrets in it. I think a lot of people thought you were cheap, but it was your technique and your knowledge and your experience that made you the cricketer that you are. And of course, wicket to wicket bowler and also a wicket. You say that you play golf, but with your sighted friends. So is there a bit of a charity factor to that, or do they let you compete at their level?
No, do you know what's really interesting is that I play with various groups of friends, and obviously you're guided. So it's much different to cricket because the ball's not moving when you hit it. So as long as you're lined up properly, when you're given the right information. So whoever's playing with you and giving you instructions is so important. But what is noticeable is if you get close to beating people, their instructions, directions get a little bit wonky. And so, you hit a shot which you think is exactly what they're just told to hit, and they go, "Oh, you're in the water." I'm like, what? So no, so I love playing golf, and frankly, they do like it as well because it's obviously a test to them to give clear direction. So the golf, I've never played in the blind golf tournament. I may well do when I have a bit more time on my hands. The cricket, actually, I think having thought I could play regular cricket, and when I ran the football team, I went to play against another cricket team, and I nearly lost my head because the ball came fizzing over my head, and it made me realise I just couldn't see it. But having played cricket, as a kid, I think the technique was already there. And my claim to fame, House, is that I did hit a 6 at the Oval, but it was on the outfield. But it was when we played one of those Surrey exhibition matches, and the guy bowled it to me, and I just absolutely leathered it, and it didn't go more than 4 feet off the ground. And it hit the advertising hoardings. And I said to the umpire, "Did that go all the way?" He went, "Yep, that's the 6 in the book, mate."
Flat 6.
Amazing. Like Chris, I did take up tandeming in later life, slightly accidentally. And one of my neighbours, speaking to me when I was in my mid-50s, said, "What are you going to do when you retire, Chris?" He said, "What about riding a bike from Land's End to John O'Groats?" So that's a bit difficult, guy, when you're blind. You could do it on a tandem. And I said, "Yeah, sure, I just need to find someone else who's stupid enough to do that." And he said, "I'll do it if you like." This was after a couple of bottles of wine, didn't think anything more about it. I was living in California at the time, and my wife emailed me a few days later and said, "I just saw a guy. He says he's booked off the 10th to the 19th of September next year for the ride from Land's End to John O'Groats, so you'd best start training." And so I did, and we did Land's End to John O'Groats. He was a personal fitness trainer, which made it somewhat easier because he was obviously very focused to get me fit. And then in 2017, I rode across the US from Pacific to Atlantic coast, which was certainly an experience.
And how about you, Chris, Mr. Lewis, with tandeming? I know you've been doing plenty of it during the lockdown.
Shh, don't tell anybody. Yeah. No,
Okay.
I used to ride a bike on my own, and probably until, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago. And then when my sight got worse, I'd heard about the tandem thing, and I borrowed one from the Charlotte's bikes. And obviously it's so different being on the back of a tandem. I think trusting the person on the front, you do need someone on the front you absolutely trust and you get on with. And yeah, I just go out as regularly as I can. It's doing exercise out in the open air is brilliant. You know, you can put enough gear on to keep yourself warm. And during lockdown, it's been an absolute pleasure cycling around London. We've been cruising all over London. We've actually covered most of the sports stadiums. So we did Spurs and Stamford Bridge the other week, cruising around. We've been out to Twickenham. We've been up to Wembley around there. Not been over to Stratford yet, but I think that might be the next one. But it's a great way of getting out. And of course, riding on the tandem you do get shouted at a lot, usually positively. And in fact, the other thing which I've done, which I really enjoyed, and which people should try if they get a chance, is the velodrome over at Stratford. They do visually impaired sessions where you can go on a racing tandem on the velodrome where Chris Hoy and all those guys did it. That is an experience. The speed when you come off the top of that bank is quite sensational.
Mr. Good Looking Chris, what about your challenges? So you talked about your challenges that you've taken part in.
The Trans-America ride was, the preparation for that was quite hard work. And Guy, who was a guy I did Land's End to John O'Groats with, had this saying, which was, fail to prepare and prepare to fail, which was his mantra for, just put in the groundwork and it will be okay. And it was indeed true that, people said, look, on this Trans-America ride, by the time you've got the first 4 days under your belt, if you're still doing it and you haven't got anything gone hideously wrong by then, chances are you'll make it through the whole 50 days. And that seemed pretty implausible 4 days in, when you just can't see the end of the tunnel. But you get to a halfway point and then you get to the 3/4 of the way, and then you suddenly realise that actually you are going to do it. And I remember one particular day when we'd had a nice following wind, and it was I think it was a 97-mile ride that day. And we got to the destination by lunchtime and just hopped off the bike and said, right, that's another day done, let's go for a beer. And you do get to the point where you feel you can just keep going day after day. Although I got to the end of it, and we'd raise a lot of money for charity. We were doing it. The basic premise was that for every mile that we rode, we would raise enough money to cure one person's sight in the developing world, because cataract operations are incredibly cheap, and for $30, $40, you can cure someone's blindness. So we figured if we could raise $40 a mile, then that would be a worthwhile thing. And we managed to raise that money. And James, who was on the front of the bike, said to me, okay, Chris, just imagine if someone said to you now, Chris, that's great, I'll double your money if you ride back to the other side again. What would you do? I thought about it for a bit. I said, I know what I'd do. I'd get my
Jump off the bike.
I'd get my checkbook out. I'd write a check for the same amount of money and say, forget about the ride.
It's funny, Hassan, isn't it? Because the thing which, having started playing cricket, Mike Brace kept telling me, oh, you've got to come and do cross-country skiing. And I thought, yeah, I'll do it one day. And actually, when I did it, I think the skiing it's one of the best sports I've ever done in terms of demanding that you train and prepare. And the great thing about that event, which obviously didn't happen this year, but you get to December thinking, I'm going to go cross-country skiing in March. I need to get my act together. Yeah. And you do. And I think, being physically fit it just helps you in so many ways, obviously physically, but also mentally as well. Just listen to you talking, Chris. I cannot imagine enduring it for that amount of time. And in fact, I spoke to you when you got back, and I know what you said to me, which is not repeatable on the podcast. So it was, and I think some comments about the food and the Wi-Fi weren't very good.
Mr. Lewis, what's the skiing like then? I know you've got fantastic volunteers out there, but how does blind skiing work then? This
is cross country, so not downhill. So you're not hurtling down a mountain, which I did do in my 20s and 30s, but and really enjoyed that. There is a track or two tracks cut in parallel in the snow, and the skis you wear basically slot into those tracks. And the way this event is organised, everyone gets a guide, and the guide that takes you. They're all the people who do sports, either management or psychology in Norway University. They have to guide as part of their degree. So you're with the same person all week. So you build a relationship with them. From the hotel, you get taken by bus down to the ski place, and it's just fascinating because there's no big uphills or big downhills, but you're generating power. You're generating your momentum most of the time, which is why it's known as being the best overall workout of any sport. And of course, you're in the fresh air, you're out in the middle of nowhere. The Norwegian army do a lot of the logistics, and they have a little tent every now and again, and there'll be hot Ribena and a bit of apple and a bit of banana. So it's just a brilliant way of spending a week.
Fantastic. You can find more information on our website, of course, and on this YouTube channel.
Yeah.
And I've taken a lot of your time, but just a few more, if I may. Just want to end with, look, you both had sparkling careers on and off the field and off the pitch, off the bike. What would be, say, one of your highlights for the last 20, 30, 40 years? My
highlight was walking down the high street in Enfield, North London, where our offices were. And this is when I was 31 at the time. And this is when Microsoft were first thinking about acquiring our business. And Bill Gates came over to do due diligence on the business. And I was walking next to Bill Gates, and I was thinking, I am walking down the street with the guy who has just been recognized as the youngest self-made billionaire in the history of the world. And then I thought to myself, but he's 32 and I'm only 31, so I've got another year to go yet. That didn't work well.
Why did this take so long for you to tell us that you walked down the street with Bill Gates? Oh gosh,
it's a long time ago.
I know. I was going to say, Chris Mairs. What about sporting wise? What was your highlight for the sporting wise?
I think it has to be winning one of the water skiing world championships. It was very much a team event, and this one was in the US in '97, and it was unbelievably close. There's a lot of rivalry between us and the US team, and it literally came down to the very last skier in the very last event on the day, and just hearing that our skier had done it and the American skier had crashed out, just like, just absolute elation.
Excellent.
How about you, Mr. Lewis?
Well, work-wise, there's so many things. I've been so lucky, like Chris, to travel around the world. But I think actually being asked to speak at a conference when I was on stage after John Chambers, who was the head of Cisco at the time, and it was in Palm Springs. I was flown in on the day. John Chambers is an unbelievable speaker, and I was on stage after him. And just to be seen, obviously vision impaired aside, just as an analyst, to be invited to do that sort of thing, to speak to that sort of audience, just brilliant, and a real culmination. And similarly, when I set up the conference, the Great Telco Debate, just getting that off the ground and running that, setting that up, and basically we managed to set up an industry conference with my wife and I working on it with very little other help, and that was just brilliant. So I think probably on stage would be the two times when the peak of my work side. And then sport's really difficult, isn't it? Because there's been so many. I mean, I sprinted for the school, and I won the sprint of the Liverpool Championships or the Northwest Championships at the time. That's unbelievable. The feeling of going over the winning line as a 100-meter sprinter and knowing you've won is great. But actually, I think I was lucky enough when one of my friends turned 50 to play on Stoke City's ground when they're in the Premier League, and actually coming out the tunnel in a Premier League ground, even though there were no crowds there, so obviously good preparation for COVID, coming out onto a pitch and playing on a pitch where some fantastic footballers have played.
No, brilliant. Thank you so much. I can't let you go without actually passing some advice on to people who want to follow your career or who want to emulate you. So to blind and partially sighted people listening out there who are either just leaving university or thinking about what to do when they leave school, what would you suggest, or what advice would you have for people who are growing up and want to be like you, successful businessmen?
I'll come back to something I said at the beginning about my stubbornness and unwillingness to accept my blindness. I think it is that balance between, on the one hand, having self-belief, but on the other hand, not feeling ashamed or embarrassed to ask for help when you need it. Since I started carrying a white stick, which was only really in my 40s, I have been truly amazed by how helpful almost everybody, without exception, who I meet is. Really, really fantastic, going out of their way, quite extraordinary distances sometimes, to actually help me get to where I need to get to, or help me with the things in life that are a bit more challenging. So don't be ashamed of asking for help.
And I think also, don't be ashamed to try things. I mean, having sprinted at school, the sports master told me, well, you're that quick, Lewis, you can try the hurdles. And I thought, I can have a go at that. Of course, I tried it because I smashed my shins on the first hurdle and never went back again. But at least I tried it, and I think that whether is that stubbornness or is that an openness to try things? What I would say is that the people that I meet who are visually impaired, there's some brilliant people. And it's just about getting that talent to the surface. Don't be afraid to try things. Don't be afraid to put yourself forward. And I think that, as we said, the technology is there much more now to help people in building a career. And just go for it. In our generation, there's a bit of a fear of failure. And I think if there's anything coming out of the world now, it's just you should try things.
Yeah, and I know this is easy to say from a position of privilege, having had a very fortunate career, but don't take yourself too seriously. I mean, things go wrong, but quite often they can be amusing in hindsight. So try to just take life as a bit of an adventure, and when things go wrong, they often become the source for some great dinner party stories.
Are you referring to my attempts at pole vaulting, perhaps? Which is even worse than hurdling, because of course you're sprinting as fast as you can down the track, and you're supposed to plant this pole in a little box before you go up over the thing. Not a hope in hell. I don't think it'll be a blind sport, but perhaps there's somebody out there that has tried it.
Gentlemen, I've done a few of these interviews. I think this is my about 7th or 8th, and I've hung on to every word that's come out of your mouths, and it's been entertaining. So looking forward to meeting up with you both, and especially you, Mr. Mairs, because I've not had the pleasure of meeting you. I can't promise to be like Bill Gates, but we'll have a drink. Look, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. It's been informative. It's been fantastic, and look forward to seeing you sometime in the future.
Pleasure.
It's been a real pleasure, and so say goodbye from me and goodbye from Chris.